Hello everyone, and thanks for the introduction, Barry. My talk today is giving some practical examples on quality assurance implementation from schemes around the country and works that they have done. I'll be giving examples from source to tap through the different critical control points. In terms of the control points, it's vital that any control measure that is put in place to address or minimize a hazard must have its effectiveness measured and verified in some regard as part of water safety planning. And I'll be referring to this throughout my presentation. This is the most important point that I want you to take away from my talk today. Thinking all the time, what hazards was the control measure designed to prevent, and has it worked? And if it hasn't worked, it needs to be looked at again, or perhaps changes need to be made in that regard. In terms of catchment and source, so just starting at the catchment and source, you would have heard from yesterday's presentation on source protection. Huge amount of work that has been done on preliminary source protection plans and zones of contribution reports. And these initial desktop studies that included mapping was one of the main parts, but also looked at potential hazards and where these were at their highest risk. So in terms of these initial studies, over 95% of privately sourced schemes have had these initial studies done on their sources. We have had some delays this year, unfortunately, with COVID-19, but hopefully we'll get to catch up with those schemes and get those completed. So while the next step over the coming years is to develop integrated catchment plans for each of these sources, group water schemes around the country have been implementing changes already. They've gained a greater understanding and knowledge from the initial studies, and they've been making changes already. And this is including perhaps looking at more further identification of hazards and implementing control measures to minimize these hazards. So just one example here, first of all, is in relation to raw water monitoring programme. And this is from a bundle of schemes in the south. We have the South Leinster DBO bundle, which has 18 schemes, and we also have further 11 schemes that's included in this bundle. And what these schemes have done is they've come together as a group, they've signed up to a raw water monitoring programme, taking the parameters for those schemes that was recommended in the ZOC reports, and the carrying out a raw water monitoring programme. And this is going to be great in terms of building a picture of the raw water status and how it changes seasonally, but also more importantly with regard to weather events. And this data is going to prove invaluable to schemes in terms of the recast drinking water directive that Brian will be discussing after the break. The next slide here is from Cullehill Group Water Scheme in County Laois, and this scheme had their ZOC report completed. If you look at the coloured map that's on the left, this is the vulnerability map from the ZOC report, and the black line in the centre is marking the catchment, and the darker red colour highlighting the vulnerable areas within the catchment. This scheme, they knew they had a nitrates issue, and once they got the catchment mapped from that study, they were able to then identify field systems, which is shown here on the right on my slide, and they then carried out a detailed sampling programme on private wells and surface water points with regard to nitrates. If you look back at the vulnerability map on the left, you can see the coloured dots, the red, the orange and the yellow within the catchment, and these are showing the levels of nitrates that the results shown from their study. And it's showing, I suppose, both elements in terms of the vulnerability map and the field system. It's showing the link between the catchment and the most vulnerable areas against the nitrate levels that was found in those areas and targeting where the work is needed. The scheme then has since engaged with farmers and provided information to them, and they're also continuing to carry out weekly raw water samples as well. My next slide here is in relation to fencing. Just another example, the two schemes that's shown here. We have Tadavna Group Water Scheme in Monaghan on the right, which has a lake source up in the Bragan Mountains, and also we have Stranuden Group Water Scheme on the left, which you've heard mentioned yesterday in terms of the pilot project. And again, in terms of control measure and putting in fencing, again, it's going back to look at raw water testing and visual inspections and seeing, is the measure proven and showing any results? And of course, we know that fencing doesn't stop nutrient getting washed into the water in other regards, and perhaps if we're not seeing any improvements, maybe buffers, diversion systems need to be looked at. And just to mention as well, which many of you may be aware of, the fencing of water courses is going to be compulsory from derogation farmers from 2021. The next slide here is just showing some examples of signage. The examples here, we have Kilsheredny Group Water Scheme in County Cavan on the right, and Dicer Tuna is the other scheme in County Clare. And again, this is a great control measure, and it can deter unwanted activities in the vicinity of the source, and monitoring this through visual inspection, but also raw water quality as well. The extract that's in the centre there, and this is from a scheme in Monaghan that recently had a dead calf dumped at the sign beside their lake. So unfortunately, having signage, it doesn't always deter problems, as this scheme found out recently. My next slide here is from Multi-Farnham Group Water Scheme in County Westmeath, and they carried out felling works around their source, which was great. And in terms of measuring this control, it would be important for raw water monitoring to look at parameters such as pH and sediment loss. Just moving on to the abstraction point, the two pictures here on the screen. We have from my Barrahy Group Water Scheme, County Monaghan. They carried out a diving survey of their lake to examine the possibility of extending the intake further out into the lake. And it was successful, and the scheme are already seeing benefits in terms of the raw water quality that they're abstracting, and also the knock-on effect on chemicals that's been used in the plant. The second example here is Glaslotte, Holland in Monaghan, and they carried out an intake extension works at the end of 2018. And they're now abstracting water a lot further into the lake. They're 120 metres from the shoreline, whereas originally they were only 10 to 20 metres. They're using a floating intake filter system 2 metres deep. And this seems to have eliminated the impact of algal bloom, which is abundant in the shallow waters around the lake shore, and where they had been previously abstracting. As I said, it was a lot closer. The scheme is currently carrying out a detailed series of tests of the raw water, looking at the original intake, the new intake, and at various depths, to try and build up the information of the raw water conditions, and with the plan to optimise the intake arrangements further. This picture here shows work that was done at Balnagar Group Water Scheme in County Offaly and their raw water tank. And this scheme has 3 spring sources that flow into this tank. So initially the work that was first done was on the actual springs themselves, and in terms of the well rings of the springs, looking at preventing root growing and also removing vegetation. And again, raw water analysis and monitoring of that will determine the benefits of all the work that they done in here in terms of protecting the abstraction point. These photos here, before and after photos, are of Ballyellen Group Water Scheme in County Carlow, and they had their ZOC report completed, and one of the recommendations that was in the report was to put a sealed cap on the borehole and raise it up from the ground to prevent any ingress. And this slide shows the before and after photo of the works, and again, raw water monitoring, visual inspections will prove the success of this. In terms of treatment plant, I suppose there can be a mix of systems, of treatment plant systems, quite very simple systems, but also very complex as well, and all depending on the raw water sources that schemes are using. The picture here on this slide is a picture of the OSEC system that's on the Sheepgrange Group Water Scheme in County Louth. It's a very good example of cleanliness and hygiene standards that should be maintained at all treatment plants. In terms of treatment, it needs to be adequate and it needs to be functioning well. And you need to be able to verify the effectiveness of each of the treatment processes. So for example, if you've got a filtration system, you need to be able to monitor the filter performance. For disinfection, monitoring of the treated water for microbiological contamination really is the most effective way of ensuring that a disinfection system is working properly. Where you've got UV system in place, that it's a validated UV. Service and calibration of equipment in line with manufacturer's instructions is critical as well. And also in terms of obviously keeping records at every stage, and alarms, having alarm systems where malfunctions can occur is vital as well. So my next slide here, this is an extract taken from treatment plant SCADA system on Inchmore, Inchbeg Group Water Scheme in County Cork. And you can see here from the graph, the type of data that they're getting back in the online system. There's a range of parameters there, including inflow, outflow, readings, chlorine residual, pH and turbidity. Okay, so the next slide that I have here, and this is raw and treated water results from Glangevlin Group Water Scheme in West Cavan. And this scheme is in the West Cavan DBO bundle. And again, the monthly analysis that is done is showing the effectiveness of the treatment process on their groundwater source, having monthly raw water and treated water external samples taken for a range of parameters. In terms of reservoirs, many schemes have carried out internal and external structural repairs to reservoirs and holding tanks in recent years to address contamination, but also health and safety risks as well. Its important verification system is to inspect reservoirs periodically, and obviously cleaning and repairing as required. In many treatment processes, particularly surface water supplies, there will be a carryover to the reservoirs, and cleaning programs need to be in place. Having a bypass system is essential as well to ensure that supply continues and that there's minimal disruptions. Chlorine residual can deteriorate quite a lot in reservoirs, and having a monitoring system before and after is really, really important to see if there's a big drop in the reservoir and what can be done. You know, too much storage can cause quite a lot of problems in the drop of chlorine. Just some examples here of reservoir refurbishment works in Kilmany Group Water Scheme in County Clare, and also Ballybricken in County Limerick. So as I said, visual inspections as well as water quality checks need to be done. And also monitoring the quantity as well going in and out of the reservoir will help determine if there's any other problems. Moving on to the network. As we know, our distribution network comprises of pipework, meters, valves, fittings, and there is a risk of recontamination in the network. Similar to other critical control points, schemes need to identify hazards, implement appropriate control measures. So problems like bursts, backflow issues, poor repair work practices, hygiene issues can occur. So looking at control measures like training, health and safety procedures, installing quality material and employing competent contractors, scouring lines after works, and monitoring chlorine levels and also turbidity levels as well. Mapping. In terms of mapping of the infrastructure on the scheme is very important. When everything is properly mapped, it can be interpreted correctly, and you can gauge where further infrastructure is needed, perhaps in terms of pressure control, further bulk meters, etc. And adding this together with water demand tools is helping to complete water audits and also assist in identifying capital works needs. There's a range of mapping systems that's now available to schemes. This map here on the slide that I've shown is from the West Limerick Group Water Scheme, and it shows their digital mapping system. It's an online system, and what the scheme can do, you can see the legend there on one side of the map. They can select what they want to show depending on what they're trying to do, and they can get a good range of details supplied on the map. And because it's digital, if there's new connections, new bulk meters, any other fittings, they can add them onto the digital map themselves. So it's kept up to date at all times. This photo here is from the Rath Group Water Scheme in County Offaly, and they were out recording GPS locations for meters and valves on the network before it was digitally mapped. And this is a good option for schemes where they can hire tools, they can go out, they can record all the GPS coordinates, and then the company that they would be dealing with can upload all the information and create the maps from them. So it certainly is a really good option for schemes. In terms of sampling, as we know, the consumer's tap is the point of compliance under the drinking water regulations as monitored through compliance monitoring. But for the group water scheme, in carrying out operational monitoring, these examples are very, very suitable. These photos show two sampling kiosks on the distribution network on the Anna Group Water Scheme and Glaslough Holland on the distribution network. They have multiple benefits to schemes, particularly during COVID-19 pandemic, and I know that Karen is going to be discussing this next in her talk in further detail. This graph here shows chlorine residual results from an automated monitoring station on the Glaslough Holland Group Water Scheme. And they've got continuous live remote monitoring 24/7. It's producing graphs on an online system is available. They've also got phone alarms set up that if there's any malfunction, whatever, any equipment, it goes directly to the manager and the caretaker. So it's great records. The next slide here is in relation to scouring. So correct unidirectional scouring is vital to ensure drinking water compliance, irrespective of the type of source or the treatment that you have in place. Scouring is going to be required. It should be run in a systematic order from the reservoir to the ends of the lines. We've run a number of these courses in recent years, and it's very, very beneficial to schemes. And then following that, having a scouring plan incorporated with record keeping at every stage of the scouring process, and monitoring for turbidity and chlorine residual is essential throughout the scouring process. In terms of emergency and public notifications and any incidents, there's a lot of great tools out there for schemes to use, and it's very important that scheme membership databases are kept up to date at all times in case of emergency. Of course, there's several forms of communication that you can use with your members, whether it's local radio, text, email, newspaper, but you may not get the attention of everybody and they may not get the message. So always a letter in the post is the best way for the schemes, and it's covering them to meet their obligations in terms of notifying their members. I had an example recently of a scheme that was issued with a do not use notice at 5 o'clock in the evening, and they had their database up to date. They were on the phone to us the next morning. We were able to assist them in getting the letters printed, and they had them all out in the post that day. That was just fantastic, and that's the type of system that you want to have in place, that you're ready at the last, if anything happens, an emergency, you can get the letters out, within a day. And members are generally very understanding. Once they're kept informed, that's all they want, is to be kept informed. And taking the approach of maybe telling them as little as possible really only leads to problems. So as board and staff of a group water scheme, it's important to be open and transparent with your members at all times. The National Federation offers assistance to schemes, and we have a range of sample notices, complaints procedures, and a lot of these are available on our website for schemes to download. So just in terms of text, texting is very good as well for members. It's great, and you're able to split it maybe into different zones if there's a particular issue or scouring going on or repairs works, and helps to pinpoint and get the message out only to a portion of the members. And again, there's a lot of great systems, text systems on the market now for schemes, and some of them are linked to billing packages. Just an example here I have up at the top of the slide is of a website from Sternuden Group Water Scheme in County Monaghan. They have great details on the website of everything that's going on, and they also have a payment section, so members are able to go in and pay their bill online. So it's a great example for anybody, any scheme to go and look at. So just in terms of summarising everything up as in a conclusion, in terms of our work with the Federation, we're out working with schemes all the time in terms of improving implementation of quality assurance, with the end goal of meeting drinking water compliance at all times, and also meeting the documentation standards. I know I didn't go through a huge amount of checklists, apart from the automated records on some of the automated systems. But that's a very, very important thing. And we do tailor that to every scheme. When we sit down and do the QA work with them and do the training, we tailor the checklist to suit their scheme. So in summary, having the QA system, it's preventing water quality incidents occurring, but also being prepared if one does occur. And it really is improving the overall management of the scheme. They're better informed and they're more efficient. It's providing members with confidence in their drinking water supply, and I think this is a very, very important one. It's going back to the communication and keeping members informed, which is critical. And finally, the implementation of the quality assurance system is a condition of operation and subsidy as well. So thank you very much for listening to my presentation.